Alright, in this episode we put before the mirror the stress that now weighs down Leo Wamuthende with more court cases and more evidence piling up. But other than that, from politics to governance, we take a look at the partnership between the Kenya and the UK military, and now the suffering in Bituk that has had members of the public asking the government to re-look at the KDF Act, making changes including partnerships with foreign forces being bound to be respectful to the communities and respectful to the neighboring environment. But before that, let us start with the Wamuthende issue. Now, sometimes back, there was a heated contest in Mbeere North. The contest was narrowing down to just 3 individuals: Leonard Muriuki Njeru, who later changed his name to Leo Wamuthende Njeru in line of this particular contest. There was Newton Kariuki, who was famously known as Newton Karish. Then there was Duncan Mbui, who was known as Kivuivui on the ground. Now, there are other members of the public that contested for the Mbeere North constituency seat, but these 3 kind of cut their niche so differently that they were the major talked about candidates in this particular by-election. And even towards the end of the by-election, up to the end of the by-election, results show that they were the 3 major horses in this particular contest. Now, the result of Mbeere North has been a subject of conversation since it was held until now, with certain camps feeling that it was marred by intimidation, voter suppression, and bribery. Others say that the way the result was tilted towards the end was done to reflect the government narrative. But other than that, there were also single wars underneath. There were wars between the former and the current deputy presidents. There were wars between the current CS and the former attorney general. There were wars between the former deputy president and the current governor. And there were wars between the 3 gentlemen themselves in the ground. But most importantly, there were party wars. Others have said that the Mbeere North people were never a concern in the recently concluded by-election, with egos going so high beyond the people and the fight being contested between personalities. But with all that said and done, the by-election in Mbeere North has since been concluded and a winner announced. The winner is Leonard Wamuthende Njeru. Now, the question is, who was contesting in Mbeere North? Was it Leonard Muriuki or was it Leonard Wamuthende Njeru? A quick answer would be, when he changed his name through the deed poll from Leonard Muriuki to Leonard Wamuthende Njeru, he put a stop to everything, meaning that now the person that was contesting became Leonard Wamuthende Njeru. But then the IBC records now show otherwise. It dictates that if you change your name through a deed poll, then there is a requirement that you also change your name through the IBC records. Now, they are moving to court with 15 lawyers set from the opposition camp to contest Malava and to contest the by-elections in Mbeere North, and some of the issues that they are raising are what we will detail for you shortly. But first, let us start from the beginning. Now, there was recently a funeral memorial service that was being conducted in Nairobi. The funeral memorial service was of a gentleman called Munyao Konzolo. Munyao Konzolo is celebrated as one of the founding members of the Democratic Party of Kenya and had served as the secretary of Kibaki for quite some time. The church where this particular memorial service was taking place gave clear instructions and guidelines to the members of the united opposition and to the public at large not to use the dais to politic. So this limited the approach with which the united opposition members, who are all present, the co-principals, are largely present in this particular memorial service, to limit what they had to say. But even with that limit, there were certain speeches and statements that were made regarding Mbeere and Malava, where we want to start from before we take a look at what has the lawyers really prepared to move to court with. Now, when Kalonzo was given that particular opportunity, from Karua to Kalonzo to Eugene Wamalwa to DP to JB Muturi to Rigathi Gachagua, the statement and the message was one. And the message was this: Mbeere and Malava were not fairly won. And so, whereas Kalonzo was saying that he would not go deeper into the details because then the position of being in charge did not require him to do so, he went ahead to say that later on in another particular platform he will have an opportunity to talk about the Mbeere North and the Malava by-election. But other than the restriction from the podium, there was also another restriction, the fact that this is going to be a live matter in court very soon. It calls upon the members of the United Opposition to refrain from commenting upon it until when it will be heard and determined. Now, so right now as we speak, the by-election in Mbeere North, where the difference between Newton Karish and Leonard Wamuthende was just 494 votes, the United Opposition now are ready to move to court with that result, saying that the person that was cleared by the IBC to contest in this seat was Leonard Muriuki Njeru. And so Leonard Wamuthende Njeru is an imposter in this seat and should not be given that particular seat. Later on, and very briefly, I want to detail to you what actually have been prepared by the 15-lawyer bench that now the DCP head of strategy, Dr. Peter Mbae, now reveals that they have formed a 15-lawyer bench that will be assembled to prepare to court a case to challenge the position of Member of Parliament from Mbeere North and the Member of Parliament for Malava. And so when they're going to court, they want the court to determine these very key questions. Number one, the members of the United Opposition want to hear from the court whether or not the opponent that they faced was Wamuthende or Muriuki. And so to this end, court will put a rest whether if you change your name through a deed poll, then it subsequently now changes your name through other government platforms, or whether once you change your name through a deed poll, it requires you now to go ahead and change your name in other government processes. To this end, therefore, the United Opposition wants the court to make that determination and also to decide whether or not the candidate that was facing Newton Karish was Leonard Muriuki or Leonard Wamuthende. Now, if the court holds that Leonard Muriuki was the individual that was facing Newton Karish, then of course there will be nullification of the results of Mbeere North, because Leonard Wamuthende will not be the rightful Member of Parliament elect in that particular area and will be facing yet again another contest of these individuals that we previously faced. But if the court holds that the person that was going against Newton Kariuki was Leonard Wamuthende Njeru, then it will put a stop to the first question that the United Opposition is asking, and the win will be handed over to the MP-elect Leo Wamuthende Njeru. But after that, the court will have a second question to deal with, and the second question is voter eligibility. Now, members of the United Opposition say, through Dr. Peter Mbae, who is the head of strategy for the DCP party, that they have credible information and evidence that there are members who voted in Mbeere North without being members of the Mbeere North constituency, or rather without being registered voters in Mbeere North. Now, this Mbeere North constituency, which was previously known as Chicago constituency, had allegations that during the time that these by-elections were actually being held, there was ferried voters who came and voted in Mbeere North, yet they did not have their cards registered to vote in Mbeere North. Now, this is a very egregious allegation, and it has to be backed with sufficient evidence that has to tilt not beyond reasonable doubt, and also does not just have to be on a balance of probability. This is what we call an intermediate balance of proof. So it has to be there between. It has to be so strong that it's not on a balance of probability, but it necessarily does not have also to be beyond reasonable doubt. So the court, through the evidence that will be provided by the United Opposition, will determine whether or not the people that voted in Mbeere North, resulting into the 494 difference between the first and the second contestants in this seat, were actually eligible to vote in Mbeere North. Where if the court finds that they were not eligible to vote in Mbeere North, then Leonard Wamuthende's stress increases. But if the court finds that they were all eligible voters to vote in Mbeere North, and then Leo Wamuthende Njeru will maintain his position as the Member of Parliament elect from Mbeere North. Then there is the third question that the court will deal with after handling the two, and the third question will be the new voter registration. Now, there is a requirement in law that when a by-election is being held, then voter registration in that particular area needs to be stopped for some time. This is as a result of avoiding the chances of actually, how do you say, influencing the voters to take votes at that time to influence a win in favor of a political party. So these are some of the steps that the IEBC has put in place as an independent electoral and boundaries commission to ensure that when there is an election going on around a particular place, then voting registration in that place is stopped. Now, Dr. Mbaye's team and the 15 lawyers will want the court to determine whether or not there was voter registration going on in Mbeere North during this period that the by-elections were also set, where if there was voter registration going on in Mbeere North during this period, then of course the stress of Leonard Muriuki Njeru increases. But if the court finds otherwise, that the process of voter registration had been stopped in Mbeere North during the by-election period, then Leo Wamuthende Njeru will maintain his position as the member of parliament elect for Mbeere North. But even that will not be the final determinant. The united opposition will then ask the court to decide the conduct of Ruku and Ellis Wahome, who have now been accused as being state officials who are actually directly involved in campaigning for a political candidate in Mbeere North. Now, the High Court will also have to put to rest where it was justified for Alice Wahome and whether or not it was justified for CS Ruku to be present and actively participate in the election campaigns for Leonard or Muriuki Njeru or Leo Wamuthende Njeru. If the court finds that it does not have any problem or there is no any legal problem with Ruku and Alice Wahome being present and actively taking part in the campaigns of Honorable Leonard Muriuki, then of course Leo Wamuthende Njeru's stress goes down. But if the court finds otherwise, that the law bars Ruku and Ellis Wahome by the dint of the fact that they serve in the public service, and Mr. Ruku is actually the CS for public service, so this is actually very funny. And so if the court finds that the law bars them from actually taking part in political campaigns, then the stresses of Mr. Leonard Wamuthende will increase. But even that will not be the end of it. The last bit of it will be the credibility of the IEBC to hold elections, which will be the last nail that the united opposition wants to hit on that coffin, saying that the credibility of the IEBC will be challenged if the IEBC will be shown through their evidence and the court determination to have not fully constituted itself in a proper way to deliver that particular by-election and also to even deliver the major elections in 2027. So these five form the critical questions that now the united opposition wants the court to make a determination on, and in answering, the court will determine whether Leo Wamuthende Njeru will become the member of parliament for Mbeere North, or whether there will be a fresh by-election in Mbeere North as a result of how the court will determine these five questions. This is a very interesting taft because this is one of the area where there was a very, very tight competition, you remember, in the recently concluded by-election, and so there is a likelihood of even having another by-election in Mbeere North shortly after the recently concluded by-election. But while this is going on, of course, also Malava, the issues are also part of it. The destruction of vehicles, the interference with Panyakos, the arrest that went on during that time, and also allegations of voter suppression and violence around voting forms part of this petition that now 15 lawyers have prepared to move to court with. Mr. Wamuthende, who seems scared but remains steady in the course of all this now, has told the united opposition that he is ready. They should just prepare his case, their case, and his lawyers will take charge from the Wamuthende end. And even after that, Kiunjuri now promises that 50 lawyers are ready to defend the UDA win in Mbeere North, stating that this is an ego reaction coming from the united opposition that cannot take a lose. And now they are saying that if the petition is actually fronted before the High Court, the UDA party is ready with 50 lawyers to countenance it moving forward. So this is going to be a very interesting legal duel with 15 lawyers from the united opposition facing 50 lawyers from the UDA camp over just two critical places, being Malava and Mbeere North. And here at the People's Mirror, we keep our lenses focused on that particular altercation as it turns out between now and the end of that fight. Now, from politics, let's go a little bit to governance. And politics and governance go hand in hand. Politics is the way through which leaders seek mandate to govern. Then governance is where leaders' test of leadership is actually put to clarity for the people to decide for the next time they are politicking whether or not they want to restore those leaders. And Kenya now is facing a problem with its governance as a result of the relationship that we have with the UK Kingdom, United Kingdom have their British soldiers somewhere called Batuk in Laikipia. And let me just start from the beginning and give a background. Okay, now Kenya has been very strategic in world peace. And so it's been a point where most foreign bodies come, or foreign countries bring their soldiers to train alongside Kenyan soldiers, train with the Kenyan soldiers as part of the AMISOM training. And also they have training grounds for their own countries within the Kenyan place. So like Laikipia, Lamu and such like places have a lot of involvement of foreign forces in Kenya. And so this is something that has been going on for quite some time. It's good for regional security. It's also good for our image and public relations with other international bodies. And of course, the most important part is that it's good for the growth of the economy, because when these soldiers come, they also come with the resources that sustain their being here, which goes to the Kenyan government. But this all done and said, it should never affect the livelihood of the communities that they come and interact with. And so we are seeing from Batuk, a petition has been made by the locals of Batuk saying that the British soldiers that came to Batuk have since gone berserk. There was a report done by the National Assembly Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations Committee, and the report shows multiple instances of misconduct, multiple instances of environmental degradation, multiple instances of negligence and disregard to Kenyan laws. And when we are talking about misconduct, the soldiers, the UK soldiers in Batuk have been actually accused of raping locals, going to public joints and starting up fights with locals and doing such like things. And even with the locals that they have legitimate children, they do not even have child support. This story, made it to national television sometimes back when women actually did a petition calling for child support or children support for the children that were sired by the British soldiers in Batuk and in the areas where they had been coming into. And the success of their petition is still likely to find full implementation. Now we are seeing, other than the legitimate children that these soldiers or have had around Batuk, there are also concerns of misconduct to the extent of rape. They cannot be properly charged, and starting fights with locals. They are trained as soldiers, so even if they walk into your pub, drink and start a fight with you, much defense exists for the local against these soldiers. There's also been aspect of environmental negligence and degradation. Locals around Batuk says these particular soldiers do not have any regard to the safety or the environment, saying they leave ordinances, and grenades that are unattended to, just like that, around where children play, around their camps. They sometimes mishandle firearms, leading to deaths of locals, such like things. So there's also that talk of environmental negligence coming from the residents. Then of course there's a disregard to local laws. They're saying that these soldiers are moving or behaving like they are immune to all laws. And of course, when they are foreigners here, even the process of charging them or taking them to court is a very lengthy process. Sometimes you'd see most Kenyan officials preferring to deport them rather than even charging them locally through the local laws. So this particular issue has left the locals of Batuk very, very vulnerable, and that is as a result of the report that was done by the National Assembly Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations Committee. Actually, it's very saddening that a gentleman called Robert Seuri died after carrying a grenade unknowingly. It was an unattended to ordinance. He carried it unknowingly, and because it had been left outside the camps of these soldiers, and when it got home, it actually exploded on him, killing him. So there have been no previous prosecution for all these claims that have been coming from Batuk. yeah, they say that this new team keeps terrorizing the surrounding in Batuk. It's a very saddening thing. The locals of Batuk are not happy with how the UK soldiers are doing their military trainings and operations around that area, are conducting themselves, or rather interacting with the locals. And they're saying they do not have even much access to challenge that, saying that challenging that they have done before, but when you make challenges, you see they get dropped so quickly. And sometimes the person lets gone scot-free without even the victim being called to put an input on what went on between them and the soldiers. So this is just a call for governance, not for politics, for the people that are currently in power, either in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Interior Security, Ministry of Defense and such like things, to come together, Ministry of Defense, to come together and really see on how they're going to protect the locals against these foreigners, because at the end of the day, these locals have the deeper right compared to these foreigners on their own land. And on our sovereignty, there is no opportunity to give white soldiers an opportunity again to come and recolonize us in our very local homes. So whatever benefits come from these soldiers, whatever benefits the country gets from being part of the UK military operations, those benefits can go down to the dogs if those benefits do not respect the people of Kenya and the local communities. And we have seen instances like this where the government gave credence not to soldiers before, but to corporations. There was a case where the government gave credence to corporations in Mombasa to the extent that they were making lead products that had direct effect on the life of the people who are living in the Uruino estate. And when the matter found its way to the Kenyan courts, it celebrated at one of the civil claims where citizens were compensated in a very high value. I think it hit over 2 billion in compensation. And so these soldiers are also not immune to our laws. When the people feel like they are being affected by these soldiers now, it's calling for the relevant authorities. The lawyers interested in this area can now talk to the people in Batuk and make a very solid petition calling for compensation from the actions of these soldiers from the UK government. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we shifted from politics a little bit into governance, because both forms part of our open democracy, and it's our duty here at the People's Mirror to mirror what's happening in the society so that all the evils can be eliminated and all the goods can be appreciated. It's been a pleasure recapping that for you here at the People's Mirror. Until our next episode.